Hello and welcome to our very, very important episode. We have taken almost 2 weeks break uh, after the last podcast I have had with the fellow panelists. Today I have got with me one of the good and decent researchers into the field of West Asian politics. She is Ananya Singh and she is from the JNU pursuing her master's from there, and she's also associated with the research project with OP Jindal University. Apart from that, she has been writing on different issues. Today we'll be discussing with her that if West Asia is still the center of the gravity of the global geopolitics, or there is some sort of change into it, and there are also some other things that we have to learn and we have to understand. Ananya will just take us to the entire thing. First of all, I would like to welcome her to our show, and secondly, Ananya, you can just open up this podcast by just drawing us a larger perspective about what's happening into the West Asia and how you have approached so far this entire region. Over to you, Ananya.
Yeah, I would just like to open with the statement that you said that whether West Asia is still the center of the gravity of politics. I would say that if West Asia does not remain the center of the gravity of politics, especially for US, then it would be a boon for West Asia. Because the problems that has arisen in the security issues in the region has been mostly because of the involvement of the great powers. First, the colonial powers, and then during the Cold War period, we saw US and USSR competition. And because of that, a lot of issues. And the oil politics had also been a great factor here. But we have seen in the recent years, all of the countries of the Middle East, specifically those who are the oil producing states, they have been trying to diversify their economy, and they want to reduce their reliance on oil. So apart from this, if we look at US and the recent move that US declared that it will not be supplying arms for Saudi in Yemen has kind of brought into the question whether US is a prominent player or a supporter of the region or not, because its interests, its focus has been shifting towards Indo-Pacific and countering China. And also the recent Ukraine war has shown that US might not be that reliable partner. So consequently, we saw that UAE abstained from voting against Russia in the draft resolution that was taken up in the Security Council against the Russian aggression. And these all tendencies are showing that the West Asian countries are doubting over US's commitment to the region, and they are now pursuing their own agenda, and they are moving in their own direction towards having some sort of regional stability. Specifically in the region, we can see the competition between Saudi Arabia and Iran as a race for regional dominance, and it has been going on for a long time. However, this has been largely complicated by, as again I told you, the great powers involvement. So these have been the major dimensions of security issues.
Ananya, most of the people, say for example, the young learners who are studying, who may be interested in studying and understanding the geopolitics of the region or the politics of the region of West Asia, what are the important things that, say for example, if we talk about the security perspective on the Middle East, then there will be NATO, there will be some other things, there will be Israel and Arab countries and their now post-Abraham Accords engagement with each other, and then the external role of the external powers, be that USA, be that Russia, be that China. I mean, this entire vacuum has been left by the withdrawal of US from the Middle East and the change of the center of gravity from Middle East to the Indo-Pacific. There is a power vacuum that's left. Certain countries may be just, refilling that and replacing US. Say, for example, Iran is striving for its own sphere of influence. Saudi is striving for its own sphere of influence. But they are not as big as China, US, Russia, or for that matter, countries like India, Pakistan. They are. I mean, how is it going to, how are things on the ground? Since you have been working on this entire issue of understanding the geopolitics of the region or the politics of these particular two countries. But to my mind, Iran can be a good, the primary contender into the region's geopolitics, but or the struggle of for power, but it's not equivalent to the Russia or US or China. So tell me more about their, if these countries do have Achilles heel of their own, if they still have their problems of their own. And also after this, we'll be discussing about the areas of the cooperation and the dynamics of the cooperation. First of all, just take up the security issue.
Yeah. So largely we see within Iran, since the 1979 revolution, there has been a republic, an Islamic republic that was installed there. However, recently we see a lot of popular protests against the government in Iran. And it's actually the people are comparing whether the Shah's regime and the Iranian current government is any different, because it's equally corrupt, it's equally authoritarian and gagging to people's rights. So that issue is there. Also, during the COVID-19 pandemic and consequently by the sanctions that were imposed on Iran, the economy of the country is in downturns. So, of course, there will be food shortage, inflation, and unemployment. And that has led a lot of discord and discontent amongst the people. So that is one issue that is going on within Iran. Secondly, for Saudi Arabia, the issue is its next door neighbor mainly, which is Yemen. When it entered Yemen, for a proxy, as a proxy there, supporting the government of Hadi Khan, Saudi thought that it would, have a massive victory in a very short period of time and then get out of the place. However, it became a long protracted war by the rebels and the government that was there, that was ousted actually in the coup. And now the consequences are reaching within Saudi's borders, and we see missiles being shooting in there. And we also see that a few years back there was an attack on its Aramco oil facility that was claimed by Houthis, but it could not have been done by Houthis alone if it were not the Iranian technology and their teachings. So Saudi has always been this very protective state about its stability. If you look at the Gulf Council states, these 6 states, sitting in the middle of a very conflict-ridden area of West Asia. And these are islands of stability because they are, very absolute monarchy and authoritarian states. And they have controlled their borders very specifically. So even if you look at the refugee crisis, like people coming from Yemen, from Palestine and all that, they do not give entry. There is absolutely zero refugees in the Gulf Council countries. So they try to protect their stability at a very high cost. And now this Yemeni crisis has been affecting the stability. And recently in UAE also, I think in February, a missile was, a missile attacked from Yemen. So these issues, plus also their economy, again, during COVID-19, all of these nations were equally hurt when the oil prices, went also negative during some time. So if we combine all these issues, the economy and the instability, and also their issue of diversification of economy and bringing in foreign investment. So if you want foreign investment, you need to show that you are a stable country. So these all issues are hurting their economic interests. And also, as I told you, that that US has been retreating from the area. So they have to look after their own interests. So for this, because of these particular issues, a kind of a new dynamic is originating in the region, where the countries are going in for massive and surprising moves of cooperation. So we have seen the Abraham Accords. We have seen the countries breaking their long-standing isolation of Qatar. Then we have seen even Turkey and Iran coming together and talking with each other. We have seen Iraq becoming a regional hub of cooperation, and Mustafa al-Kadhimi, the president, has been inviting leaders from Saudi and Iran and having talks. Although these talks have been slow and have not been able to generate that much of any outcome, but yet it has shown that the leaders are willing to cooperate. We have seen Bahrain and UAE and all these countries meeting with Iran and vice versa. So these all issues, specifically the retreat of the great powers from the region and the regional vacuum, as you have mentioned, has kind of brought forth this cooperative stances from the countries. Also, but there is this concern of new arising powers getting into the area, like China. So China signed a deal with Iran of around $400 billion, and that is going to be a lifeline for this sanctioned economy. But also we know how China deals with countries it gives loans to. Countries often get into debt trap diplomacy and all that. So if Iran is not very cautious, it can also get into that, and China can then hold leverage over the entire area by getting into Iran. So yeah, these are the issues that have been going on.
Ananya, most of the people do get confused with this thing that the IR enthusiasts. So the people who study IR, they do have this understanding about Saudi-Iran relations. The first thing that comes to their mind is that there is basically the sectarian dictum that is so common to the bilateral relations of the two countries and to the regional politics of the entire Middle Eastern region. And second thing is that the areas of the cooperation, even if you in your paper, I have just read it, you're talking about that the areas of cooperation, especially in the last century, they have been not direct kind of a cooperation between the two countries. It has been actually enabled by US, because US was considering during the Cold War times, it was doing its shoddy things in the entire region. It was using the two pillars of the Islamic world against the onslaught of the communism that the Secretary of the State would confess and write in his own book. You are talking about the areas of the cooperation between Saudi and Iran. Tell us more about them. That what did US enabled, and how did US enable the entire cooperation between the two countries? And it was a limited cooperation, I reckon. Even if to this point in time, we have not still have the billion-dollar deals between the two countries, but areas of cooperation that has been enabled by US. So what was it all about?
Okay, so the US enabled cooperation between Saudi and Iran was only until the 1979 revolution. So when there was a friendly government of the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran, till then there was this kind of bonhomie because US was investing there. US was trying to take leverage of the economy of Iran and the well-trained army of Saudi, and to counter the USSR intervention there. However, after the revolution, and when a non-friendly government was set up in Iran, we see that US no more wanted any kind of cooperation between Saudi and Iran, because now it's an enemy state. And successively, many governments that have come up in US have tried to pressurize Iran for various things. Specifically, if we look at the Iran-Iraq war that happened from 1980. So before that war also, US was directly taking in Iraqi personnel and training them, and also helping them in some sort of programs, defense programs. So that was right next to the border of Iran, which will obviously threaten it. So, and when the Iraq-Iran war happened, there was massive investment and help and aid from both US and Saudi towards Iraq. So this sort of conflict was there, and there was no more cooperation, no more intent of cooperation from US between these two countries after the overthrow of Pahlavi dynasty. However, what is very spectacular about this region is, as I have talked about it in the paper, it's a pendulum of conflict and cooperation. And there has been no full-fledged direct conflict between Saudi and Iran. So even after when the Islamic Republic of Iran was established, and the new government that came in wanted to spread the revolution in the other Islamic countries of the region, and thought that this was the right way of governing the Islamic world, which they termed as wilayat-e-faqih, or the guardianship of the jurist. So this was a direct threat towards the monarchical governments of the Gulf Council countries. But despite that, Saudi Arabia sent its envoys to Iran to congratulate the newly established regime. And it did not directly go for any sort of confrontation. And there were many incidents where there were minor conflict. But there were, hello, am I audible?
You are.
Hello?
You can just continue.
Yeah. Okay. So because of after every conflict, big or small, there was a corresponding, amending kind of attempt to limit that conflict. So there is a conflict, then the countries evaluate the situation that it is getting out of hand, and immediately there's some sort of mending between the two states. So this sort of pendulum was there, where they kind of balanced that the pendulum should not go too much in favor of a direct escalation or a war. And this went on through the years. So even if there is no direct cooperation, as you said, there was no direct billion-dollar deals between them, but there was also no direct conflict. And this is purely because these two countries are mid-level powers, and they are not very sure of each other's, the extent of their power. So until and unless one of them exceeds the other in its power quotient by a huge margin, this kind of maintenance of conflict and cooperation will continue.
Do also make a mention about the nuclear issue into the region. I mean, both the countries have aspirations to be the nuclear powers of the region in order to favor the asymmetric, in order to give this entire struggle an asymmetric nature or an asymmetric touch, because the country that will be possessing nukes, say for example, Saudi or one of the two countries, Saudi or Iran, will possess nukes in the future, it will change the entire balance of power into the region. So you have also mentioned something called nuclear balance into the region. What's that about?
Currently, see, Saudi being a US ally, it is unlikely that it will have a nuclear power in the near future. And actually, for a brief period of time, there was also talks on among the regional powers that there should be a weapons-free kind of zone in the region. There should be no nuclear power. But that would mean that Israel should also give up its nuclear capabilities. But then that was not acceptable to either Israel or US. So because of that kind of threat, this weapons-free zone could not be created. And there's a constant threat over Iran's head, if you look at it, Israel being there, and US giving maximum pressure all the time, and with all the rhetorics and all that. So therefore, it went ahead with its nuclear program. I mean, I was reading this book by Noam Chomsky, Who Rules the World? And he claims that US is the #1 terror sponsoring state in the world. And even if you look at the Iran's threat, it is actually the threat to US that has been exacerbated by the US subsequent governments and have been shown as a threat to the world.
One more thing is that if Chomsky was, I mean, I have not read the book, but one thing is for sure that when we look at the Middle Eastern politics or the geopolitics of the region in the Cold War
Mm-hmm.
era, I mean, it's quite clear that US was having, backing the insurgent groups or the terrorist groups in order to
Yeah.
install or, get rid of the regimes into these particular countries, especially the North Africa and the Middle Eastern
Mm.
region. So that's
Yeah.
how military industrial complex does work. That's also what Chomsky has been saying. I mean, tell me more about this, the future prospects of these regions, since after the withdrawal of retreat of the great powers from the region, there is a
Mm.
vacuum. US, I mean, the countries of the entire region are taking the issues on the merit, and they are
Mm.
just making inroads into that vacuum, and obviously they will be engaging with each other on their own mutually agreeable and understood equation, or mutually understood things, so that they will carve a path for the peace and prosperity of the region. Uh, so tell me,
Yeah.
what are the prospects that we'll be looking at in future?
Yeah. So the region has been showing some sort of independence from great powers. As recently there was this talk of when US called upon Saudi Arabia regarding the oil prices. It was just disregarded. It was not paid heed to. And then there are tacit or implicit support to Russia from coming from Saudi and UAE. So there is we see that some sort of independent foreign policies and independent stances taken up from these countries. Also, the power vacuum that has been created is being very, what do I say, very responsibly taken upon by the countries. Like recently, as in the previous month, when UAE was hit by the missiles from Yemen, it did not immediately take any action against Iran, and it's still deliberating upon how to take up that issue. Like, should it do business as usual with Iran and disregard the fact that even though it was Houthis who had filed, who had attacked UAE, uh, it's all Iranian missiles. But the fact that they are not immediately, countering each other and still going on with the process of peace shows that they are more into economic stability now. So their primary concern has become economic stability so that they can move on with their diversification program. And they have set up certain visions in the future, and they are taking up that. And they're establishing themselves as investment hubs like we see in UAE and all that. So, and even in recent elections that happened in Iraq, we saw that it was expected that the elections would be rigged by Iran, considering how much influence Iran has over the military of Iraq. But it was still a tremendous result, and it showed that since no one party could win an absolute win, it was not that rigged as it was expected. So that is a tremendous achievement we can see there. So what I'm seeing in the region is an economy over politics that is taking over.